February 24, 1944. The rain-slicked roads south of Cisterna, Italy, churned into brown slurry by weeks of armored traffic, held a silent giant. American tankers from the 1st Armored Division crouched warily beside it, rifles at the ready, though the threat had long since fled. Before them sat the Elefant, a 70-ton behemoth of German engineering, its hull scarred by a dozen American 75mm and 76mm shells that had struck its frontal glacis and simply ricocheted skyward like pebbles off a fortress wall. The armor here measured 200mm, twice the thickness of a Tiger I's front plate, thicker than any Allied tank could hope to penetrate at combat ranges. Yet, as the GIs moved closer, boots sinking in the mud, a strange detail arrested them. There were no machine guns, not on the sides, not in the rear, not atop the casemate, only a single ball-mounted MG-34 in the lower hull, fixed to fire straight ahead, useless against anything approaching from the flanks or rear. These were veterans. They'd fought Panzer IIIs in Tunisia, knocked out Stug 3s in Sicily, faced down Panthers in the snow-covered passes of the Apennines. Every German armored vehicle they'd ever encountered bristled with defensive firepower, coaxial machine guns, hull mounts, even anti-aircraft MG-42s repurposed for close-in infantry suppression. But this steel leviathan, capable of killing a Sherman at 3,000 meters, had been built with almost no means to defend itself against a lone soldier with a grenade. The realization struck like a physical blow. Invincibility was an illusion. This moment, muddy, quiet, almost mundane, confirmed what Soviet reports from Kursk had whispered for months. The Ferdinand, later renamed Elefant, was both a masterpiece of heavy armor engineering and a catastrophic failure of battlefield pragmatism. It embodied a fatal German obsession, the pursuit of theoretical perfection at the expense of operational reality. And in the mountains of Italy, as in the steppes of Russia, that flaw would prove lethal. To understand how such a contradiction could roll off the assembly line, one must return to 1942 and to the ego of a man who believed his friendship with Hitler could override physics. Ferdinand Porsche, the automotive genius behind the Volkswagen Beetle and the pre-war Auto Union Grand Prix cars, had long enjoyed the Führer's personal favor. When the Wehrmacht launched a competition for a new heavy breakthrough tank, the Durchbruchwagen, Porsche didn't just submit a design. He acted as if victory were assured. While Henschel & Son developed a conventional, turreted tank with a centrally mounted fighting compartment, Porsche proposed something radical: a petrol-electric drive system with twin Maybach engines powering generators that, in turn, drove electric motors in each track. The layout placed the engines amidships, the crew compartment forward, and the massive 88mm gun in a fixed rear casemate. Convinced his vision would win, Porsche, without official approval, ordered 100 chassis built at the Nibelungen Work factory in St. Valentin, Austria. It was an act of breathtaking presumption, but when trials began at Berka in April 1942, reality intruded. The Porsche design overheated in mud. Its complex transmission failed under stress, and its ground pressure, exacerbated by narrow tracks, sank it in soft terrain. Henschel's simpler, mechanically driven design proved more reliable, more maintainable, and easier to produce. It became the Tiger I. Porsche's 100 orphaned chassis represented a colossal waste of scarce resources: steel, labor, factory capacity. Rather than scrap them, the German High Command made a fateful decision: convert them into heavy tank destroyers. Engineers relocated the engines forward, welded a massive armored casemate over the rear, and mounted the most powerful anti-tank gun in the German arsenal, the 8.8-centimeter Pak-43-2L71. The result was the Panzerjäger Tiger P, officially SDKF 184, but universally known as the Ferdinand, a name that carried both homage and irony. 91 vehicles rolled out between March and May 1943. On paper, they were terrifying. Weighing 65 tons, the Ferdinand dwarfed every Allied tank destroyer. Its frontal armor, 100mm baseplate plus a bolted-on 100mm applique, rendered it immune to all Allied and Soviet anti-tank weapons at ranges under 1,500 meters. The Pak-43 could punch through 190mm of rolled homogeneous armor at 1,000 meters, enough to kill a T-34 or Sherman from distances where the enemy couldn't even see the muzzle flash. Soviet tankers would later recount watching their comrades' vehicles explode in fireballs from what appeared to be a speck on the horizon. Inside, the crew of 6 operated in stark isolation. The driver and radio operator sat in a cramped compartment at the very front, cut off from the 4-man gun crew in the rear casemate. Communication between them relied solely on an internal radio, a fragile link that often failed in combat. Vision was abysmal. The commander peered through narrow slits, the gunner through a single periscope. There were no periscopes on the sides, no rear-view mirrors, no escape hatches above the fighting compartment. Once buttoned up, the crew was blind to everything except what lay directly ahead. There were no machine guns for close defense. German doctrine assumed tank destroyers would operate in concert with infantry. Panzer Grenadier would screen the flanks, suppress enemy riflemen, and prevent close assaults. In theory, the Ferdinand's role was simple: anchor a defensive line, engage enemy armor at extreme range, and let lighter units handle the rest. But war is not theory. The Ferdinand's combat debut came at Kursk, July 1943, Operation Citadel, Hitler's last great gamble in the East. 89 Ferdinands deployed with the 653rd and 654th Heavy Panzerjäger battalions under the command of Oberst Rudolf Radl. Even before the offensive began, 6 broke down. Engines seized, transmissions fried, tracks thrown. The remaining 83 rolled forward at dawn on July 5th, spearheading Field Marshal Walter Model's Northern Pincer. For the first hours, they were unstoppable. Soviet T-34s charged across open fields, only to be annihilated before they closed to 2,000 meters. Shells bounced harmlessly off the Ferdinand's glacis. Some Soviet crews abandoned their tanks in panic, convinced they faced an invincible monster. But the Red Army had prepared. Across the Kursk salient, they'd laid over 400,000 anti-tank mines in layered belts. The Ferdinand's immense weight, 65 tons on narrow tracks, made it a mine magnet. A single TM-46 detonation under a road wheel could snap suspension arms, shatter track links, or jam the drive sprocket. Recovery required 3 Bergpanzer IV recovery vehicles working in tandem, impossible under fire. By 1700 hours on day 1, 33 of 45 Ferdinands in the 653rd Battalion were immobilized, not by enemy guns, but by mines. And once stopped, they were helpless. Soviet infantry, trained to overcome tank phobia by having tanks drive over their trenches, quickly adapted. They let the Ferdinands roll past their foxholes, then emerged with PTR-D-41 anti-tank rifles, Molotov cocktails, and satchel charges. The PTRD couldn't penetrate the frontal armor, but it could shatter vision blocks, puncture engine grills, or sever hydraulic lines. Molotovs dumped burning gasoline onto the engine deck. Grenades tossed into ventilation slits filled the casemate with smoke and shrapnel. Ferdinand crews had no answer, no machine guns, no way to see attackers crouched beside their hulls. Some tried firing their personal MP-40s through open hatches, exposing themselves to snipers. Others attempted the absurd, loading an MG-42 into the 88mm barrel and traversing the entire gun to aim at infantry. It rarely worked. Most simply abandoned their vehicles and ran. Many never made it back to German lines. Official German records claimed the Ferdinands destroyed over 500 Soviet tanks at Kursk. But the truth was darker. Most losses came from mines, breakdowns, and infantry, not enemy armor. Of the 89 that started the battle, only about 50 remained operational when Hitler called off Citadel on July 12th. The lesson was clear, but not yet heeded. In late 1943, surviving Ferdinands were recalled to Germany for modification. At the Nibelungen work, engineers added a ball-mounted MG-34 in the hull front, installed a commander's cupola with 7 vision blocks borrowed from the Stug 3, applied Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste, and reinforced engine grills. The upgrades added 5 tons, bringing the weight to 70 tons, but the engines remained unchanged. The vehicle grew slower, more sluggish, more prone to mechanical failure. On May 1, 1944, Hitler ordered the name changed from Ferdinand to Elefant, perhaps to distance the weapon from its disgraced namesake, perhaps to evoke its ponderous might. In February 1944, 11 Elephants were rushed to Italy to counter the Allied beachhead at Anzio. The mountainous terrain proved even more hostile than the Russian steppe. Narrow roads, stone bridges rated for 10 tons, steep inclines. None were built for 70-ton monsters. Engines overheated on climbs. Transmissions failed on descents. Tracks wore out in days with no spares available. When one broke down on a hairpin turn, it blocked the entire column until engineers could push it into a ravine. It was near Cisterna, in late May, that American forces encountered their first Elephant, Vehicle 102, stranded by an engine fire. The crew fled. U.S. engineers swarmed it, taking measurements, photographing every detail, noting the single forward-firing MG-34, the blind rear quarters, the exposed final drives. Intelligence reports from Kursk had been accurate. This was a weapon optimized for one narrow scenario: long-range ambush with infantry support, and useless everywhere else. American doctrine adapted swiftly. Avoid frontal engagements. Use the Sherman's superior mobility to flank. Call in artillery on immobilized elephants. Even the humble 75mm gun could penetrate the 80mm side armor at 500 meters. Most elephants in Italy were lost not to combat, but to mechanical failure, abandoned on mountain roads, scuttled when fuel ran low, or simply left behind during retreats. Of the 11 sent to Italy, only 3 escaped in August 1944. The rest, Ferdinand 114, 131, 113, fell to breakdowns, mines, or well-placed artillery. Vehicle 102, once Ferdinand 633 at Kursk, was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. There, U.S. engineers confirmed what frontline troops already knew: impressive specs do not equal battlefield effectiveness. Back in the East, the last Elephants fought a rearguard action through Ukraine and Poland. In January 1945, A handful participated in the Vistula-Oder battles. In April, the final survivors died south of Berlin. By war's end, only 2 remained intact, one in Soviet hands at Kubinka, the other in American custody at Fort Gregg Adams. So how could Germany's finest engineers build a 70-ton tank destroyer with no defense against infantry? The answer lies not in incompetence, but in doctrine gone rigid. German armored theory assumed perfect coordination. Infantry would always screen the flanks. Terrain would always allow recovery. Visibility would always permit target acquisition. But Kursk and Cisterna proved otherwise. Mines disrupted formations. Fog blinded commanders. Infantry got pinned down. In the chaos of real combat, the Ferdinand's lack of machine guns wasn't an oversight. It was a bet. A bet that the enemy would play by German rules. American designers drew the opposite lesson. The M10 Wolverine and M36 Jackson had thin armor, open turrets, and modest guns, but they were fast, reliable, and packed with machine guns. They relied on mobility, not mass, on tactical flexibility, not frontal invincibility. They accepted that tank destroyers would get hit and designed them to survive, escape, and fight again. The Ferdinand Elefant thus stands as one of history's great paradoxes, a weapon that was simultaneously over-engineered and under-equipped. It could kill anything in front of it, but couldn't see, hear, or defend against what came from the sides. It consumed vast resources, yet delivered limited strategic impact. It inspired terror in enemy tankers, but dread in its own crews, who knew that one mine, one breakdown, one determined infantryman with a grenade could turn their steel fortress into a tomb. Today, visitors to Fort Gregg Adams or Kubinka stare in awe at the Elefant's massive gun, its fortress-like armor. Then their eyes drift to the single, tiny machine gun in the hull, and they understand. The most powerful tank destroyer of 1943 was undone not by superior enemy technology, but by the oldest weapon in warfare, a man on foot willing to close the distance. For the Soviets at Kursk, that man carried a Molotov. For the Americans at Cisterna, he called in artillery. For the Germans, he was the ghost in the machine, the flaw in the logic, the human factor their equations forgot. In the end, the Ferdinand's legacy is not one of triumph, but of warning. In war, practicality beats perfection. Survivability requires more than thick steel. It demands vision, agility, and the humility to design for chaos, not for textbooks. And sometimes, the most fearsome weapon is the one that can't protect itself. The story of the Ferdinand, and later the Elefant, is not just a tale of engineering ambition gone awry. It is a stark lesson in the difference between theoretical power and battlefield reality. Germany built a weapon that could dominate a textbook engagement, yet failed to account for mud, mines, mechanical strain, or the relentless ingenuity of an enemy on foot. In doing so, they created a machine that was simultaneously awe-inspiring and tragically vulnerable. A monument to over-specialization in a war that rewarded adaptability above all. What the Americans and Soviets learned, and what every modern military now teaches, is this. The best weapon isn't the one with the thickest armor or the longest gun. It's the one that works when everything else is falling apart. If this deep dive into one of World War II's most misunderstood weapons revealed truths you hadn't considered about design, doctrine, or the human cost of engineering arrogance, we invite you to subscribe and tap the bell for our next episode. We're committed to going beyond the myths, using archival records, technical analysis, and veteran insights to reconstruct history as it truly happened, not as it's been simplified. And if you know someone who served in armor, engineering, or logistics, someone who understands that war is won not just by firepower, but by reliability, foresight, and the courage to admit when a design has failed, share this film, because remembering how weapons actually performed, not just how they were supposed to, is how we honor those who faced them and those who built them. This isn't just military history. It's a masterclass in the cost of ignoring reality.